All right, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started for this next session. Okay, so my name is Lieutenant Colonel Tim Jones. I'm the G6 of the 82nd Airborne Division out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And for the next hour or so, our topic is going to be the finite resource of navigating the complexities in electromagnetic spectrum. I think this is like the third time that we've addressed this while at TechNet. So hopefully we hit different talking points. But the overall objective here is kind of discuss, some of the management, the planning, the challenges, the complexities, the increased demands, and also to think about the red pen, the threat analysis as well too. And then some innovative approaches as well, to how to address some of those issues and what the Army needs to do moving forward to maintain dominance within the spectrum. Because we kind of see that it's not one of the listed domains, but you have to use it like it is a domain, right? And navigating through that. For the panel, I'm joined by a group of talented spectrum managers, EW specialists, and experts from the field of all development, training, and then warfighting. So before we begin, we'll give an opportunity for the panel members to introduce themselves, and then what we'll do is I'll ask them a couple questions that I drafted up myself. We'll go down the line, ask those questions, and then we'll open up the floor towards the end for any question and answer from the floor, and then we'll go from there. All right. So Sergeant Major Nicholas Perez.
Hey, thanks, sir.
Yep.
Just for feedback's sake. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Sergeant Major Nick Perez. I am currently the Senior U.S. Army Spectrum Manager. I also serve as the TAC C4 Division Sergeant Major for U.S. Army Forces Command for as long as we're still calling it U.S. Army Forces Command. I have had the opportunity to be at a panel yesterday. I'm not sure how many were in there. Looks like this is about half of that attendance, where I probably showed a little bit of my passion for Spectrum and what it means to me. I have a wonderful career of serving across different FORSCOM units, NATO, special operations. Had the opportunity to work at the Pentagon and out at U.S. Army Pacific just recently. So hopefully my experiences can add value to this conversation, and I look forward to the discussions and the professionals that are joining me on this panel. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I feel kind of out of place, the only civilian sitting on the panel. But I'm Mr. Chad Fox. I'm with the Command and Control CFT. Just recently, my boss just briefed Next Gen C2. I'm their EW cybersecurity, cyberspace expert. And I know I'm going to get hit a little bit with Next Gen C2, where the Army's shifting. But I'm a retired electronic warfare technician. So I should have pulled out my uniform out of the closet. But I'm looking forward to this panel. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Good morning. I'm Master Sergeant Kelly. I'm currently in between the CTS Sergeant Major position and transitioning to the R-Cyber G23 Sergeant Major. So in 2016, I reclassed to a 29 Echo. Now we're known as 17 Echoes. I have one FORSCOM deployment as a 29, and I have a deployment with SOF as a 17 Echo. So I really do want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak on this topic, especially with how evolving and the increased demand that we have with the EMS.
Morning, everybody. I'm Sergeant Major Oladapo Agbula. I am the Signal Proponent Sergeant Major, so I work with the Chief of Signal to effect changes for the Signal MOS. I've been 25 Echo for about 15 years now, so I've had a mix of both CONUS and of OCONUS spectrum management. So I've been a part of both sides. Now I'm the Signal proponent, so I get to see a different side of the spectrum management, how it plays out across the MOS.
All right, thank you. So we'll start with the first question. The first question goes to Sergeant Major Perez. So how do we do better when we integrate the planning and management functions of Spectrum while also leveraging the tactical execution of electronic warfare to ensure operational freedom of maneuver? And there's kind of two parts to that. Specifically, how do we foster a closer relationship between these two critical functions to mitigate the interference? Because again, the enemy has a say, but to also leverage Spectrum to our advantage in a contested environment.
Yeah, thanks for keeping it light, sir. The first question. So I talked about a little bit about this yesterday, right? And I think Anyone who was in here yesterday understands where I'm coming from. And not where I'm coming from, but where the Army is required to be at when we talk about freedom of maneuver in the electromagnetic environment, right? So I will refer to that now for those unfamiliar. I will refer to it, and hopefully the panel will chime in on that. Electromagnetic operating environment, I will call the EMOE for brevity in conversation, right? There's a misconception on what the Army thinks electromagnetic warfare is and what spectrum management is. A lot of times people have a misconception that spectrum managers assign frequencies and that's the only thing that they do. And that couldn't be further from the truth, right? And I think I mentioned it yesterday, and I'll mention it again. The electromagnetic operating environment, EMOE, saying it twice so it sticks in your head, is part of expanded maneuver, right? What the Army is thinking about now as expanded maneuver space. So not to knock you, sir, when you talked about domain, that's a very touchy subject. It is not a domain, it is a maneuver space. But we've gotten away from doing the cross-staff collaboration that made us the greatest fighting force in the world. As soon as we started doing stuff in stovepipes, right? As soon as people started defending rice bowls. Hey, there is no difference between myself and Master Sergeant Kelly as far as what our responsibilities are to our commanders and what our responsibilities are to enable freedom of maneuver. So how do we bring those walls down and not think that, oh, I deal in this portion of the EMS and the commander's asking me this question, I have to answer the commander no matter what. If you don't have the authority or responsibility to, you don't. You have to defer to the person who is responsible for that. And we find this not at ASCC level, but what we find this happening, and I think you'd agree with me, sir, is likely at corps and division, and then division and below. And so we've got to clear the space and have the conversations like this in public so that senior leaders also get it, right? Because a lot of times we're marching to the sound of the drum of our commander. What does the commander need? What does the commander want? I'm going to get there no matter what that is. But if you're looking to do it on your own, or if you're looking to answer it only from, let's say, the SEMA cell, and you're not capturing the 50% of EMSO that exists in the G6 from a spectrum management perspective, then we're really missing the mark, I think. And we're getting better at it, I think, through education and training, and I'm sure Sergeant Major Egbula will talk a little bit about that. However, you're not bringing in the people who are required to educate and help you make informed decisions when you need them to inform you to make those decisions, right? A lot of times, spectrum requirements come up and it's a week before you want to turn it on. And then you get frustrated that the G6 isn't helping you. That's not how this is done, right? And it goes back to a culture problem too. 25 Echoes in the Army are purely non-commissioned officers. And a brand new 25 Echo coming out of the schoolhouse, only really understanding how to speak spectrum, not necessarily how to manipulate and maneuver in it, doesn't have the confidence to bring to the table what the commander needs. And we've got to be better at empowering those NCOs to do that kind of thing.
Thank you. Any responses from the panel?
Yeah, Sergeant Major. So what I've seen work really well is, and group and Ranger Regiment do this because they understand how to use electronic warfare soldiers as well as the 25 Echoes. So at group, we set up the very first EW platoon, and what we had the bandwidth to do was pull the 25 Echo into our SEMA cell. So we embedded him in there, and then we have 4 battalions that we took care of. So we were able to place 4 spectrum managers, 1 at each battalion, and that has been successful. So what I struggle with is like, why can't we look at units that, regardless of that mission set, the intent is the same. So why does FORSCOM, like all of FORSCOM, not follow that same pattern?
So thank you. So we do, right? I think it was General Morrison back when he was in the CCOE who came up with the SEMA doctrine to put the 25 Echo in the SEMA cell, right? Here's back to the culture problem that I'm talking about, is that when you put a 25 Echo in the SEMA cell, the 25 Echo becomes so engulfed in what SEMA requirements and priorities are, EW ConOps, doing all the decision making. And you know what 25 Echoes and SEMA cells are not doing? informing the SEMA cell on how spectrum management works. They rebrand themselves as 17 series in the SEMA cell, focus on what is the 50-meter target of the day in the SEMA cell, and when there's good news, they deliver it, and when there's bad news, they point to the 6. And they say, no, the G6 says we can't do that. Well, that's why I have a 25 echo in the SEMA cell, right? Not to say we can't do that, but to explain to 170 Bravos and 17 Bravos on the wild bureaucracy that is spectrum management, inform them on it so that they don't think the answer is, hey, my spectrum guy, I need to do this. It's great that SOF was, and what year was that when you were able to do that at group? Do you remember?
Yes. So I was there from 2019 until 2024.
Yeah. So,
But they're still doing it now.
yeah, of course. And again, there's a different culture inside of the SOF flag, right? I spent a long time on the other side of the fence, and I can tell you I had a lot of opportunity to accept a whole lot of risk that I don't have as a sergeant major that I did have as a staff sergeant on the other side of the fence, right? That's just the way that goes, right? There's a lot more responsibility placed on you because of the severity of what you're trying to accomplish in such a short amount of time. And again, my comments on 25 echoes in the SEMA cell is not a generalization or a swath, right? But feedback from the combatant commands, as I just recently addressed to our population, is that we have a lot of work to do. And again, I think the problem is that once they start working in that environment, they become so operationally focused that they're only trying to move towards what the mission is of the SEMA cell. And they're not necessarily the most experienced in managing spectrum, or I'll stop saying managing spectrum too. I'll start saying spectrum maneuver. They're less experienced in spectrum maneuver, and their pride doesn't allow them to go to the senior spectrum manager inside the organization to ask for help. And so we get a bad rap a lot of the times, right? Battalion SEMA cells, brigade SEMA cells, those SEMA officers and those battalion and brigade commanders get promoted, and all of a sudden spectrum management doesn't help me. They only tell me I can't do something, which is a bad look for us, because there is so much opportunity to do what everyone wants to do. You just have to be a critical thinker and solve those problems for the sake of the organization.
All right, thank you. That kind of leads, so we kind of identified a kind of a friction point, and we kind of admired the problems. But I'll open it up as a question for the whole panel. How do we fix this? How do we become more integrated and synchronized, not only from the SEMA cells and busting down these stovepipes, integrating with the 2, the 3, the 6, the 25 echo goes over, but he's still integrated with the 6. How do we fix this problem?
So I think one way that we can fix this problem is for that we have to have a permanent seat at the table. So it seems to me like a commander will go into a situation and already have a plan worked out, and then have Spectrum EW as an afterthought. So Spectrum can't be an afterthought. We have to be in the MDMP process from like start to finish. You have to have Spectrum considerations and everything. One thing I want to point out is that for Spectrum and EW, we don't really have a part to play during like a CTC. So when we go to CTC, we do all our Spectrum planning prior, we get in the box, and then, we get hit with jamming. We get like some EW instance. So instead of letting that play out, it has passed. So no commander is feeling the real consequences of what an EW or being deprived of Spectrum is going to do to your formation. It's not wait an hour and then go ahead and proceed with your war plan. If you get hit with the Spectrum incident, it is career ending, it's life ending, it's like total devastation. So commanders are not feeling that impact. So, it's not really at the forefront of their minds when they have to think about it.
So, Sergeant Major, I like your comments, but where the Army's going with Next Gen C2, which is a common theme around here, we're leveling the playing field when it comes to information sharing with the data layer and the multiple transports that we have. So with this stovepipes across all warfighters, that is going to get flattened across the network in itself to that data centric. So it'll help commanders and the spectrum managers be able to manage that spectrum, but make those decisions needed at a timely need.
Can I speak? Yeah. Hey, sir, thanks. So next gen C2, obviously everybody's talking about next gen C2, and it's great, right? And we're thinking about multi-domain operations and what the future fight is, Army 2040, 2050, 2060. The reality is we have to stop talking about managing spectrum, right? It's not managing spectrum. It's ensuring on-demand access to the electromagnetic spectrum. Does that need to be managed? Yeah, but does it stop when we think we have enough? No, because as you know, right, we will constantly be placed in congested, contested environments where, and again, this is all great while we talk about continental United States. We seem to always put ourselves in where we are geographically at TechNet all the time, right? The conversation is different at TechNet Pacific. It's different at TechNet Europe. Those things get exponentially worse. Maybe not from a next-gen C2 perspective, because we don't have to worry about all that because that's already done on delivery. But from freedom of maneuver in those AORs becomes increasingly difficult, especially when we're talking about scale, right? This is great that a brigade in an infantry division is doing awesome with 15 terminals and all eyes on them, and they got the full weight and support of the Army. Now put that in a large-scale competition in the Ukraine, and what does that look like? What does that turn out to be? To Sergeant Major Agbula's point, right? When are we going to stop making spectrum events notional? When are they going to be real? And when are we really going to test our ability to maneuver through that contested environment? Not to be passionate or anything, but just to let's think about that, right?
So I got to follow on with that question. So at scale, it was talked in the last panel. From the next gen C2, we're looking at fourth ID. That's going to be the division scale that we're going to find, and we're going to learn how to not manage, but maneuver within the spectrum, the electromagnetic environment, to better put it at, which is going to change across multiple formations. And that's what next gen C2 is working towards. It's not going to be vendor locked. It's going to have the ability to be tailored at the unit. So with fourth ID being that first prototype, 25th ID will be that next, which was discussed next. So we'll have two different COCOMs of understanding how to maneuver within the spectrum.
You'll have two different units and two different AORs understand how to do that. I would argue that we don't have two different COCOMs understanding how to do that, because the scale of that is not 4th ID and 25th ID. The scale of that is 18th Airborne Corps and 3rd Corps in the same AOR, requiring the same resource. And how do we navigate that? And that's what keeps me up at night.
Sorry, Major, to that point, it doesn't matter what we keep moving to the next gen C2. If we can't get the Army to understand how to use the 25 echoes and 17 echoes at large, we're going to keep running into the same issue that we have. Because I'm sure last year's TechNet, the same conversations we're having. So who are the decision makers that should be in this room to hear these issues and to hear the knowledge that's sitting here and even the knowledge that's out here to make all this happen? Because we have the answers, but it's not being applied at all units. To your point, you'll have 1 or 2 units that do it. So my experience with the echoes, he did not get embedded to our ConOps. He didn't touch that. But he knew what training events we had, and he was like, hey, you guys got to get this request in soon, or I can't give you the allocations that you need. So I did not have a negative experience the entire time I was there. But that's that unit. So we need the right decision makers to move us in that direction instead of having the conversations of merging 25 echoes and 17 echoes. Because now you have 2 big responsibilities and you're trying to make one MOS the jack of all trades, and we're moving, like we're trying to move at the speed of light, but we haven't even caught up where we're currently at. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, that's ruminant. Nobody write that down. Second of all, I don't think we need decision makers in the room, right? I think the decision makers understand the significance of the electromagnetic spectrum. They understand the significance of freedom of maneuver and expanded maneuver. That's an Army warfighting concept that we're talking about now, right? I don't think it's them that is the problem. I think the problem is at echelon. The problem is that we are not educating commanders at echelon to be able to appreciate that and understand the force multiplication that is possible from a 17 echo and a 25 echo, right? Here's a problem, Signal Regiment. When 29 echoes transferred over to 17 echoes, they had to go through a 2-week course in understanding what it means to be part of the cyber branch, right? Along with that, they all had to qualify for top secret security clearances. Top secret security clearances is not a requirement for MOS 25 echo, which means when you're having those conversations on signals, on ConOps, at echelon, in the skiff, you're at echelon, at a battalion or a brigade, you don't have a 25 echo in the room who can help because they're not cleared to be in the room or have those conversations. I would argue that some of those ConOps you're developing are overclassified, but not that point. But the Signal Regiment hasn't made that a requirement like the Cyber Regiment has made that a requirement for the 17 echoes, right? And when you start talking about maneuver and you start making decisions in skiff space and you don't have a voice of the other side, not someone who's feeding what you want to hear, but somebody who's trying to help get you to the place you want to be in the clear, right? Because again, in the continental United States, a big part of our job isn't just assigning frequencies, it's also protecting our commanders and making sure that we're not doing things illegally, because there is a legal aspect of radiating in the United States. And until you do that and educate at echelon, right, we're responsible for that. We're responsible. It's not about who's in the room now, because everybody in this room is super important. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but you are, and you all make decisions every day. But senior Army leaders talk about this. This gets talked about in the Pentagon, right? This gets talked about in ForceCom. This gets talked about at all the Army Service Component Commands. And again, at the Army Service Component Command level, it's not a problem, right? They feed into the combatant command. They don't see the 17 echo, 25 echo thing. Doesn't make any sense to them. What are you guys talking about? That's an us problem. That's a division and below problem. That's a maybe corps and below problem. I don't know if Colonel Baird would tell me if that's a problem or not at corps, but it's a 50-meter problem for us, not for strategic thinkers who are not experiencing the frustration that we are in this conversation. So how do we, as NCOs, make that better on the ground in the formations that it's a problem? That's our responsibility, right? I don't need a senior leader to come tell Colonel Jones in the 82nd, make sure you use your spectrum manager right. I need Colonel Jones to know that spectrum manager is important, and that 17 series is important too, and they need to talk to each other. And he facilitates that. And you know why? Because I'm not responsible for what happens in the spectrum if I'm in the G6. Colonel Jones is responsible for it. And his division commander isn't looking for me, he's looking for him. And so how do we get the leaders at echelon to appreciate that and use the talent they have appropriately to support what their missions are, as opposed to thinking this existential problem exists in the Army, which, again, I would have you have this conversation with General Ray, and I bet you he knows it better than I do.
Okay. So we'll bring it back to the human factor, and this question is for Sergeant Major Agbula. So looking at our operators, and it starts in the institutional knowledge pillar, right? How are we evolving our learning model with our Army signal and cyber leaders and our students? What foundational skill sets must they master to enhance their commander's ability to achieve spectrum dominance and superiority of mission success?
So as we're transforming, it's kind of hard to narrow it down to a particular skill set that they have to learn. And I would say the most important thing would be to be adaptive, which you can't really teach in the classroom. So tick units, transformation in contact. I was in one of these panels and somebody said it like very succinctly: continuous progress of experimentation, adaptation, and improvement while conducting missions. So that is the definition, and that's what we have to do. We have to be adaptive. So if you look forward or you look across the formation, look at Ukraine. They had to be a tick army fighting the Russians. So they started off, got some gains, started getting hit, and then they transformed, especially with their drone technology. So the Russians were throwing like everything at them, but they were able to adapt and overcome. So who here were to think 2 years ago that the Ukrainians would still be in any kind of realistic fight with the Russians? So being able to be adaptive, learning from what you have and bringing it back to the rest of the army, that is a very important point, I think. Also, being proficient in countering enemy jamming. So I spoke to a lot of students, and it was surprising to me that they were not aware of what actual jamming looks like. So, jamming is just not like, oh, I can't talk on my radio. The enemy is shaping the battlefield. So, they will jam a little bit of this, directing you to where they want to go so they can exploit you. I'm sure Master Sergeant Kelly can speak a lot about that. So just identifying jamming, and then finally working with the 17 echoes, 25 echoes, and 17 echoes, being able to work together. So we're separate MOSs. We have distinct roles and responsibilities. And Sergeant Major Perez said it correctly. Like, if there is a 17 echo question, I don't take it upon myself and say, oh yeah, I can answer that question. I bring it to the expert. But I'm not gonna leave the commander uninformed. So I'm gonna give him my take from the spectrum side, and then I'm gonna make sure that Master Sergeant Kelly, she has her say.
Any other responses? Good. Okay, we'll shift this back over to Mr. Fox in the innovation space. You talked about Next Gen C2 broadly. Is there any more specifics you can talk to us about what the challenges within the spectrum and what Next Gen C2 is working with, specifically looking at a DDIL environment?
Well, there's going to be many challenges, and one, we're still trying to define that, even with the prototype. General Cluson, the way the network's going to be, it's going to be that SDR. It's going to be multiple pipelines. There's going to be multiple transports with Pelio or Trilos or something that's going to help enable the commander. But there's also going to be AI. So understanding how the AI agent's going to react within the database to, one, determine what you're going to use for the transport, which is going to lessen the burden of a formation, a division formation. So it's going to be a challenge, and we're going to learn from it. And there's going to be a lot of changes coming out of policy might change. The way that we request spectrum might change. We don't know, but it's going to be a learning environment.
Sorry, again, the spectrum isn't the Army's thing, right? Spectrum traverses all the services and is a national thing. So to your point, I'm hoping that we get some dynamic spectrum access capability, right? Where it's cognitive access to bandwidth, which would make the managing of spectrum not a problem, because it would just find space to operate in. But again, from the service side, there's not a whole lot of things we can change on how frequency requests go, right? We can maybe change it up to the Army, but then the Army's got to put it in however the NTIA or the FCC or the FAA, however they need to receive it. And that's, a lot of times we're in charge of creating dynamic solutions to a lot of unique problems as a land component, but spectrum isn't an Army thing, right? It's a national thing. It's an international thing. There are legislative bodies responsible for it, and we don't get to dictate how they do business. And we have to assimilate to that. And we might be able to make it easier for the warfighter, which I would argue is something we need to do, right? But all that means is then we have to translate it back, and depending on where we are in the world, find a unique way to be able to gain access to that sovereign resource wherever we are, and however they want to receive that in order for us to be peasy clean. Not a problem if we've got cognitive access to spectrum. But again, I believe those things are developing. I look to my industry fellows and fellas. But I would assume that as that technology advances and we start leaning forward into it, we're also looking at it from a policy side, from a Department of Defense side, on how that gets managed for the military industrial complex writ large, not just for a service.
So, the title of the panel, Spectrum is the finite resource. So I believe that we're always going to be working in a spectrum limited environment. So all the spectrum we have now is all we're ever going to get. So we have to come up with a way to work within the limitations. Every year, every iteration, we get new toys, we get new technology that does new things. But with these new things come increase in the bandwidth, increase in the needed spectrum. So a couple of years from now, we could have AI, machine learning, all that does a whole bunch of spectrum for us, but it still runs on the spectrum. And we can only use a limited amount of bandwidth.
Yeah, but there's a lot of spectrum that we're not using because physics don't allow us to yet, right? Because technology hasn't been developed to access that portion of the spectrum. I would assume that sometime in the future, there will be technology that can do that. And now we've increased our property value because we're building in a piece of land that hasn't been able to be touched because of the limitations of technology. But dynamic spectrum access takes a lot of problems away, right? And if you think about how accessing the spectrum when and how you need it, or from an MCOM perspective, right? Signals that operate under the noise floor. We've opened a whole kind of opportunity of technology that exists today that is being used, but not delivered to the force at scale. So they're unique technological solutions that aren't widely known, but with Next Gen C2 and the development of the rapid development and acquisition of technology like this to the force is going to see, it's going to be a game changer in how we understand what the electromagnetic spectrum is and how we can harness it. And we haven't realized it to its full potential yet, but I promise that there are things going on at APG and at DARPA and other agencies that are developing technology that we're not thinking about at this level, that we should start thinking about it because it's going to make us more combat effective. And I think that's where the Army is looking for when we start talking about not only next gen C2, but next gen warfighting in an expanded maneuver environment.
Yeah, and I think we're only going to learn that through experimentation and through these prototypes moving forward. And plus the help from industry of letting us experiment with new ways and new capabilities as we move into that next warfare moving forward. But good comment.
Okay, this question is for Master and Kelly. Understanding everything that was been discussed, just want to give you an opportunity to talk about electronic warfare and how the Army can develop a unified understanding of the operational framework for EW.
Roger, sir. So I know that doctrine is being updated currently to help with this framework, but in order for the doctrine to actually come to life, EW needs to be made as a core capability. It's just like what we keep saying. I can't answer this question any different than we've already talked about. It needs to be a core function rather than a reactive go-to. Like, he mentioned earlier, oh, we're experiencing jamming, where's the EW guy? Like, that should not be, that's not when we should talk about that or talk about counter jamming. We should be in the planning phase and MDMP on day zero. So the Army, and I am not convinced that even at the strategic level that we understand the full limits and applicability of EW. Because I feel like if we did, it should be easier for these divisions and corps and brigades to be able to implement that down. But that's not at the level that I'm feeling it. Like I don't. Every time I go to a room, and I'm sure a lot of EWs can feel this as well, you have to advocate why you're there and why you're important. And you spend like the first year of your time at that duty station explaining why you're important. It takes some kind of incident to happen, whether that's a loss of life or an almost loss of life, before they pull you in and like, hey, what else can you do? Because a lot of people, say EW is just jamming. No, we don't jam unless we really have to. Because if we stand out on the spectrum, you can get a 10-digit grid very easily. The same thing we can do to the enemy is the same thing they can do to us. And I think that's why it's very important to have the 25 echoes embedded into the SEMA cell. That way you focus on green, I focus on red, and then we make sure that we're hitting the commander's intent. But we have to have the commanders buy into that. So.
Hey, so I'm sorry that it seems like I keep jumping on stuff you say, and I don't mean that. But what's going to solve a lot of that is the Army and CCOE is part of this train. We talked about it earlier about their MDO conference. They're going to have another one the end of this month, where I'm going to talk about Spectrum a little bit. But we are back to the idea that EW is notional, right? The Army is going through, look at the force protection. If anyone's not familiar with C-130I, right? C-130I is a force protection function for counter UAS at installations across the Army. That is a lot of work to get cleared through all the required agencies that need clearance to get the authority to install and operate counter UAS systems. But in line with the C-130I is EW home station training, right? And they talked about creating a EW range here. We do some of that stuff at foundry sites across the Army, but how do we get the back 40 of Fort Bragg, some area, cleared for electromagnetic attack, right? How do we do that in a training environment where we can put commanders through the paces of contested environments? Because otherwise and again, doctrine's important, right? But I don't remember running to doctrine to tell me how to do something. And if you do that for a commander at their home station and run them through electromagnetic attack lanes from a home station training perspective, they'll understand the reality of what that actually happens. And to your point, right? We got to be careful about saying jamming, right? 35% of the time it's interference, it's not jamming. And we just got to be better at planning communications. But if we can do that across the Army, and again, that's difficult too. They're doing a little bit of that in Europe, and they're doing a little bit of that at JPMRC in the Pacific. But if you can do that at home station and allow commanders to realize and make it combat capable criteria, then it becomes important to them. Not just when it happens to them in Poland, right? But when it happens to them in Kentucky or at JRTC or at NTC, and it becomes a graded criteria for them to be combat capable, then I think that's when they're going to start taking it seriously, right? But in the meantime, back to my point about relevance is your SEMA OICs and your G6s are the ones who empower you to be in those meetings and do those things. I don't expect Colonel Jones to be a subject matter expert on Spectrum, right? But I expect him to bring his Spectrum subject matter expert to all the meetings he goes to. And when he does that, that's when you gain your relevance. And the same applies to the SEMA. I would expect Colonel Bear at Corps to bring in his 17 series in any planning meeting or CONOP development or any of that. And and he doesn't need to be the subject matter expert, although you are, sir. But if he wasn't the subject matter expert, he's got someone to help him with blind spots. Where can we be better at this? It's not an authoritarian environment, especially when we're talking about EW and Spectrum. But the counter to that is you're only as relevant as you want to be. And if you are not trying to get into those meetings, then your officers are less likely to pull you into them. And they will just take the responsibility all to themselves if they find you no value added. And so how do we make that a relevancy conversation as we're sending people out of the schoolhouse from both the 25 Echo and 17 Echo courses? How do we make them come out of here as hungry warfighters ready to take on the world? I want Colonel Jones to put his 25 Echo in place. I want him to say, hey, that's thanks for your energy. Or, and I want the SEMA guys to go, hey, thanks for your energy. Let's mentor and develop you. Keep that hunger and you'll realize it soon enough. But I think now we get out and, not taking shots at Fort Gordon, but I think now we get a bunch of lackluster people come out of a arduous training environment where they didn't really take anything away. They know how to say the words that the terms of reference for each function, but they go to a unit and they go, now what do I do? Instead of, this is what I'm here to do. And that's what we need to start producing from TRADOC. We need to start producing hungry, knowledgeable, war-fighting mentality as opposed to administrators from both 25 Echo and 17 Echo lanes.
All right, I'm going to throw my EW technician hat on. I'm going to pull it out of the closet. So I hear both stories, but right now you have capabilities going out to the force. You have TLS Manpack, you have EW PMT version 1, you're going to have X on Next Gen C2. So, but you have commanders, you have corps, you have divisions that have QRC capability, quick reaction capabilities, that understand how to maneuver and exercise their EW capabilities and maneuver within the spectrum with that. So it's a learning curve that's going to be part of experimentation moving forward. That's going to move the Army forward with Spectrum and EW.
I think we highlight the negative in these conversations, right? Because there are opportunities to put them out on the floor. Let's not be naive, right? There's a whole lot more good happening in spectrum and electromagnetic warfare than we are advertising here. But this is a platform to talk about some of the frustrations that we see in the formations and some of the conversations that are being had at senior levels, right? Where you go, hey, listen, there's a whole lot of information that you don't have to make a decision on this. Please allow us the opportunity to give you that information. And sometimes it feels like I'm punching underwater, especially from the ForceCom lens, but we seem to be highlighting the bad here, and I don't want to paint that picture. There is a tremendous amount of cross-staff collaboration between the 2, 3s, and 6s at echelon to include battalions, some of them. Some are doing it great and some are not doing it very well. We have to bring those lessons learned from those who are being exquisite at this, to your point, because it does exist, and allow forum like lessons learned forums to bring those realities to the rest of the force. So I know 17 Echoes as an MOS and 25 Echoes as an MOS has independent forums where our communications are flat. And I say this to everyone who tells me they're frustrated with spectrum management, right? We are a very proud people, especially wearing this uniform. And so a lot of times people are afraid to ask for help. But what I tell commanders who try to tell me, hey, my spectrum guy or gal is not, they got to be better. Hey, I'm in a forum. I have a Teams channel where a question can be asked, and you have 17 spectrum managers answering that question to help that staff sergeant at echelon or sergeant first class at a brigade solve a problem. Hey, do it this way. Hey, call me. Hey, do this. I am unfortunately glued to this device where I'm answering stuff at 11 o'clock at night to someone in Korea trying to help solve their problem. So if we continue to breed a culture of community where we're only as good as our weakest link in both of these disciplines, where it's not a competition for who's the best, where you can drop your pride and ask the question. I mean, there's 500 spectrum managers in the Army, and our community allows all of those 500 spectrum managers to be everyone's spectrum manager. If your spectrum manager asks a question, he's got 100 answers on how to help. And they're normally all the same answer. It's not a bunch of different ways. But what I mean is that because we're such a small community, we are so tight knit that there's no question that's asked that isn't immediately answered across the entire Army. And I'm looking at 325 Echo Sergeant Majors here, and we talk regularly about all of our AORs and how do we breed the relevancy, how do we help the warfighters, and how do we educate commanders on the significance of the people that they have in their formations? Because I can't expect a staff sergeant coming out of Fort Gordon to get to their unit and say, hey, this is what I'm responsible for, and this is what I provide to the fight. And if they get to the unit and they go, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, the answer cannot be, I only do spectrum management. We're NCOs first, and spectrum managers is a unique skill set that we bring to the table. But if they don't respect you as an NCO, they're not going to allow you to do what you're supposed to do for the organization.
And that's all great points. And it's a good segue, since we only have 9 minutes left, to open the floor for questions. Sir.
Hello, sir. My question is, I have plans in place to allow some level of cross-training between 25 echoes and 17 echoes, so as to enable 25 echoes to be with side effects and also 17 echoes to be able to do spectrum analysis. And my second question is, are 25 echoes and 17 echoes here in the cyber working group, just like fire and intel are?
So yeah, thank you so much, Sergeant, for the question, and I'll give opportunity for everyone else to ask, but to answer. But 100%, right? We have to not make the first time a 17 Echo talks to a 25 Echo at the unit of action, right? That's not where the first time that's supposed to happen. That should happen here. That should happen in TRADOC. Maybe there are opportunities to have a culminating FTX at two of the different courses where we can plan, right? We can simulate planning and execution of, EW ConOps and freedom of maneuver from a blue force perspective. I think 100% we need to start doing that. Yes, again, different depending on where you're at, but I believe, so 17 Echoes are good at talking about spectrum analysis, right? From analyzing the spectrum perspective. They're very good at that. Dude, since I became a 25 Echo, one of my core jobs has been to resolve interference. And I do that through spectrum analysis and direction finding interference if I can, if it's local interference. And how do you solve that? I think there are aspects of those things where we are in the same sandbox. We understand each other much more than we disagree with each other. And the problem isn't, and I'll tell this publicly, we just had this brief conversation before we started the panel. And Master Sergeant Kelly said, the problem isn't with 17 Echoes and 25 Echoes. The problem is higher than us, right? We're just moving to the sound of the drum. Where's the X? Where do we need to go? Tell me, and we're going there, right? The problem is there's a little bit of a political problem here where people think one should own the other or this one does it better than that. But to Sergeant Major Agbula's point, right? We have unique and distinct responsibilities that are codified by law, by policy, by doctrine, all the way up to the Department of Defense, right? But if you don't know about those things and you can't articulate the significance of that, then it's not important if you're not in a position to be able to say that. So forums like these, forums like, writing articles and doing all these things, trying to educate the force on what the significance is of these two functions because we all know the rumors. We've talked about it all 17 since I became a frequency manager. Oh, frequency managers are going to become 29 echoes, right? And then they made 17 echoes, and 17 echoes are going to take 25 echoes. And it's not a function conversation, right? It is a branch conversation. And so what from the cyber branch makes them believe that spectrum management should be in the hands of a 17 echo, or vice versa, right? Again, just the rumor mill. None of these things are real. They are discussions that people have, and I got to be careful. But because they are so similar, that's where people's brains go, right? And unfortunately, commanders and G6s and G3s are products of their experience. And if they have a negative experience at some point with a 17 or a 25, they disregard that for the majority of their career until they get a good one. And they go, oh, wow, I didn't know you could do this. Man, I wish I knew that when I was a battalion commander. Or man, when I was a brigade S6, I wish I knew Spectrum guys could do that. Or 17s could do this. And again, I have been very privileged to be in a lot of awesome organizations where none of this was a problem. Everybody was together and everybody was moving forward together. And it was almost, my environments have almost been MOS agnostic. It didn't matter what your job was. Everybody was in it together. What are you good at? Everybody working together, realizing the commander's intent through disciplined initiative, right? The very tenets of mission command. But we now have a responsibility, all of us up here, to include Mr. Fox at the CFT, to ensure that we are being good stewards of that. And we are educating. Hey, I'm at ForceCom. Do you know how many units fall under ForceCom? I have a responsibility to make sure that everybody in the ComRel of ForceCom, at least until it becomes something else, which isn't rumors, I have a responsibility to ensure all the sixes, the commanders, understand the relevancy of the talent they have in their formations. And if they have a problem with that, then they have a direct line to me to correct it. And we do that from a 25 echo. Again, I have enough people here to co-sign on that. We do it, and we do it immediately. And I can immediately reach the 525 echoes in the Army and, shot across the bow. Hey, we're messing up. We need to clean up here, here, here. Let me know if you need help, or let Sergeant Major Agbula or let Sergeant Major Rodriguez or the Sergeant Major in your AOR, the closest Sergeant Major to you, let them know where you need help so that you can start delivering force multiplication effects to your commander. And so, again, it's not an easy problem to solve. I know I totally gave you my answer to your question, but there's connective tissue there. There's more connective tissue than there isn't there. But unless you force, right, at our levels, at Colonel Jones's level, at Colonel Baer's level, unless you force the synchronization across the 2, 3, and 6, you're always going to fail. And until you have the people in those directorates who understand and appreciate that, then you're always going to fail. And so we have to get commanders to start forcing that integration.
Okay, since the next gen C2 discussion took about 5 minutes of our time, we're going to continue going. So does anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
We'll both answer.
So yes, to your question. Fourth ID, General Ellis, he was our prior director. That's what he wants. He's opened the invitation to industry to come up, and that's where we're going to experiment. We're going to learn lessons, but we're also going to learn it from you guys, from industry, when it comes to that spectrum, how to maneuver, how to take the environment, get out of the traditional aspects. It's going to be challenging, but we're going to learn from it.
Yeah. So I think, so to your point, right, we'd love to use more commercial spectrum, if that's where you're going with that. I think you're going with the.
Yeah, you can maneuver in and out of your spectrum.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a.
The phones do it today.
They do, and that's a capability development, right, or a capability delivery that really dictates how we do that, right? There are the policy procedures on the back end of that need to make sure that from at least a uniform perspective, we're doing that right. But you can never forget that there's dollars associated with spectrum access, right? And it's not, I don't pay for it. We're in the uniform, we don't pay for it, right? But you certainly do in industry. And there are conglomerates, to your point, right? The Walmart of spectrum, right? That have a market share on spectrum access because they're paying billions of dollars for it, which is why from one of the hats of protecting your leadership, right? You want to make sure that you don't ever infringe on that because those companies will get their money one way or the other. So if there are technologies that the Army is interested in and is using that traverses different bands of spectrum, whether it's federal or non-federal or commercial, right? That's why we have memorandums of understanding. That's why we have agreements amongst companies to be able to do that kind of stuff. As long as everybody's getting paid is what I believe on the commercial side, then the shared use of spectrum isn't a problem, right? But that's a sublease thing. That's a legal thing. And that is not something I can speak very educated on. However, we don't have any, we don't care what spectrum we're using as long as we can use it. And if it's traversing federal and non-federal and that, which is great, but those agreements are only good here. They're not good in Poland, or they're not good in another Pacific country. So we have to deal with their ministries of communication in order to come up with an agreement. And maybe, back in the global war on terror days, we had to change a whole kind of communications we were doing in Jordan because we were about to knock out their national television, right? Population doesn't want that. We certainly don't want that. And so we had to look at unique opportunities to navigate what we were used to using in the continental United States and have solutions for that across borders where you might not be able to turn that stuff on.
Okay, so we're past time. So hopefully we got some great points from everybody on the panel, and hopefully you guys found some value out of the discussion. We probably could go another hour on this topic. So we've got some work to do, but I appreciate everybody who attended. I definitely appreciate the panel members. So let's please clap for them. And then thank you guys all. Have a good lunch.